So bad cultures do arise very often from historical circumstances, including historical discrimination. What I say is that today, there's nothing preventing an individual from superseding the culture in which you grew up and making good decisions. Okay, well, you have just used the word female and woman to define each other. So you say a woman is a female, but not a biological female. A female is a woman and a woman is a female, but at no point have you added any new content.
Ben sees woke culture as a dangerous ideology that replaces facts with feelings and distorts reality with myths. For him, it undermines traditional values and societal truths, creating confusion and moral decay. Today, Shapiro is tackling one of the most overhyped myths perpetuated by woke students.
The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true. Okay, and I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be.
In this video, we'll explore 7 instances where Ben Shapiro challenged woke students with his sharp logic, unwavering stance, and unapologetic arguments. Each moment reflects his broader critique of woke culture. The first instance is his challenging biological realities. Ben Shapiro often debates gender identity, emphasizing biological truths over subjective feelings. During an event at a university in Wisconsin, Shapiro faced a student arguing for the legitimacy of self-identified gender. The student asserted that gender is fluid and not determined by biology. Shapiro countered by arguing that biological sex is immutable and forms the foundation of human identity.
In one of your more infamous debates, you said, "I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are."
Yes.
My argument is not that terms like biological female or biological male are necessarily offensive. My argument is that you are saying that referring to a trans woman as a woman or a trans man as a man or et cetera, is like inherently offensive or threatens biology. And I'm curious why it's so threatened when there's clear precedent for changing the language.
Ben questioned the logic of separating gender from biological sex, using clear examples to show the inconsistencies in the student's argument. He argued that while legal documents and personal feelings may evolve, biological facts remain constant and unchangeable. For Shapiro, acknowledging biological realities is essential to maintaining societal coherence. The discussion grew intense when the student claimed that personal identity should take precedence over biology. Shapiro rejected this, stating that denying biological truths leads to societal confusion and erodes the principles of science and logic.
Again, the term mother does not include father. Every category has to have boundaries. The boundary of female starts at male. And when you start including male in the category of female, you are threatening biological definitions as well as basic truth.
How do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay. Oh, someone's excited. Okay.
Biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society.
Okay. No, it is not in the mind, okay? You're not a man if you think you're a man. And I didn't say pretending, or if I did, I shouldn't have said pretending. Let me amend.
You said playing.
Okay, I said a boy who thinks he's a girl. That's the usual phraseology I use. Not playing. I usually say a boy who thinks he's a girl or a girl who thinks he's a boy, which is technically what we're talking about here. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, it used to be called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria.
In another college debate, Shapiro introduced a provocative analogy to challenge the concept of self-identified gender. He asked a student, "Why aren't you 60?" This question highlighted the limits of subjective identification and questioned the logic of changing one's identity based solely on feelings.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you.
The student attempted to argue that age and gender are fundamentally different. However, Ben maintained that both are rooted in objective realities that cannot be altered by personal perception.
Why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People
You
recognize
can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously, you can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do lots of things in the past that were incorrect biologically and correct legally.
For Shapiro, this analogy was a powerful way to expose the contradictions within woke ideology. He asserted that redefining fundamental truths leads to instability and undermines societal norms. Cancel culture is another focal point of Shapiro's critique. He describes it as the enforcement mechanism of woke ideology, where dissenting voices are silenced without room for redemption. During a heated exchange with a student, Ben argued that cancel culture creates a toxic environment where individuals are punished for holding unpopular opinions.
Stay off social media. Really, have a news feed on Twitter, have a news feed on Facebook, check Instagram. Don't post anything for the rest of your life. Social media ruins your life. I don't just mean this in terms of you post something and then 10 years later people come after you with something that you posted, which is the current sport. The virtue signaling by which people go back into the past, grab something, then use it as a club against you. No, it doesn't matter that you're high schoolers, by the way.
Shapiro emphasized that free speech is essential for a healthy democracy. He pointed out how cancel culture stifles open dialogue and discourages people from expressing their views. According to Ben, this fear-driven culture undermines intellectual growth and fosters conformity.
It really has no relevance what age you are. As long as you are an enemy, they will do whatever they can to ruin you. It's not just that. It's also that social media contributes to a really ugly sense of self-aggrandizement. You think people are thinking about you all the time because you're in conversations with them all the time. This is particularly true of Twitter. I have very close friends who I think were very negatively affected by their overuse of social media. Don't fall into that trap. It's something I'm speaking as basically an AA member about social media here.
The student defended cancel culture as a way to hold people accountable. Shapiro responded by highlighting the lack of forgiveness in such practices, calling it a dangerous trend that leaves no room for personal growth or learning.
I'm gradually attempting to wean myself from it, and I'm in withdrawal now, and it's very difficult, and relapses are frequent. But there will come a point at which I have discovered, I think, the best way to use social media. But if you can avoid it, don't get sucked into the maw that is social media, particularly.
Ben Shapiro frequently challenges the woke narrative on systemic inequality, arguing that it overlooks personal responsibility and individual choices. In a debate with a college activist, Shapiro confronted the idea that systemic factors are solely responsible for societal disparities.
Hey, Ben, so I'm definitely a left-leaning student, but I listen to your podcast every day.
Well, thank you for coming and thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So my question is about race and culture. So while I agree with you that when you look at white America, it's silly to say that the majority of white Americans are actively trying to prevent you from getting to where you want to be. I'm East Indian, and I have definitely experienced some racism, but I never felt as though it keeps Indians from succeeding. So I do think there's a cultural component that supersedes the color of your skin.
He argued that while systemic issues exist, they do not account for every disparity. Shapiro stressed the importance of hard work, personal accountability, and individual effort in achieving success. He accused woke culture of promoting victimhood and ignoring the role of personal agency. The activist countered by citing examples of systemic racism and inequality. Shapiro acknowledged these issues, but maintained that focusing solely on systemic factors creates a culture of dependency and resentment. For him, emphasizing personal responsibility is the key to overcoming challenges.
So, yes, I think bad cultures have nothing to do with race. I don't think that just because, this is why I'm saying I don't know why it borders on racism to say the cultures are bad. Like, some cultures are bad, some cultures are good, and that has nothing to do with race. Charles Murray wrote an entire book called Coming Apart about pathologies in white communities that are really destructive. So bad cultures do arise very often from historical circumstances, including historical discrimination. What I say is that today, there's nothing preventing an individual from superseding the culture in which you grew up and making good decisions.
One of Ben Shapiro's most profound critiques of woke ideology revolves around its manipulation of truth. In a debate with a student, he argued that wokeness redefines language and concepts to suit its agenda, creating confusion and instability.
Like, I read your book on the arguments to fight against people like me, and I feel bad because, like, for the most part, the people who have been arguing against you aren't nearly as elegant or eloquent as they should be. But I'd just like to ask, so one of your points you very strongly make is that it's unfair for people like me to label you as like a racist or a bigot just as like a smear tactic. But have you ever acknowledged that like maybe it's not a smear tactic, but it's based on things you've said? So like, for example, like on the Israel-Palestine conflict, you called the Arabs. Yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume.
Shapiro pointed out how terms like violence and safety have been redefined to include words and ideas rather than actions. He argued that this shift undermines free speech and fosters a culture of fear. According to Ben, this manipulation of language is a deliberate tactic to control discourse and suppress dissent. The student defended the redefinition of terms as a way to promote inclusivity. Shapiro rejected this argument, stating that clarity and consistency in language are essential for meaningful dialogue and societal progress. Another heated debate occurred when Shapiro addressed the distinction between sex and gender. He argued that separating the two defies biological reality and leads to illogical conclusions. Shapiro maintained that gender is intrinsically linked to biology and cannot be redefined based on personal feelings.
We use the DSM-5 now for psychologists to be able to talk about...
I literally cited the DSM-5 in the speech, and it's called gender dysphoria, which is a term that I use throughout the speech, not gender identity
disorder. You sound like a bozo, bro. And you get no pussy,
for.
And you can't even make your wife wet, bro, so what's good?
So, let me just say, the nice thing about having several small children is I don't feel the necessity to have my masculinity
challenged. We're using a
by
Western
like
colonial idea of gender, then why should it apply?
During this exchange, a student challenged Shapiro by asserting that gender is a social construct. Ben responded by acknowledging the social aspects of gender roles, but insisted that these roles are rooted in biological differences. He argued that denying this connection leads to confusion and undermines scientific principles.
As a mathematician and a physicist, what in the hell do you know about human biology?
And you got your law degree from Harvard. What do you know about biology? You got your law degree from Harvard.
And frankly, I would ask another question. If your logic is so flawed as a mathematician and a physicist, I would suggest that whichever institution gave you an award, revoke it immediately.
For Shapiro, the debate over gender and biology is not just an academic discussion, but a critical cultural issue. He believes that accepting biological realities is essential for maintaining societal stability and coherence. Finally, Shapiro often highlights the contradictions within woke culture, from inconsistent rules to selective outrage. In a debate with a student, he pointed out how woke ideology often applies double standards depending on the situation.
And all of these associations have multiple thousands of doctors, sociologists, psychologists, and with PhDs in their respective fields backing the idea that sex and gender are different, effectively gaining the medical consensus for sex and gender being two different concepts, yet you have a different opinion.
Okay, so sex and gender are two different concepts, but gender is tied to biology. So one of the big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable.
For example, Shapiro criticized how some woke activists claim that speech is violence, while simultaneously defending violent protests as free expression. He argued that these contradictions reveal the ideological flaws of wokeness and undermine its credibility.
You see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance as to whether they are a male or a female. Male and female are biological terms. So using terminology like male and female to describe a self-perception of maleness or femaleness is sort of a bizarre way of arguing whether a thing is a man or a woman. So here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
The student attempted to justify these inconsistencies by emphasizing the complexity of social issues. Shapiro countered by stating that principles should remain consistent, regardless of context. For him, the selective application of rules is a hallmark of ideological hypocrisy.
Transgenderism makes the argument that if you believe that you are a woman, you are therefore a woman. Or if you believe that you are a man, you are therefore a man. I disagree with this. There are objective measures as to whether you're a man or a woman.
So, 7 moments where Ben Shapiro masterfully challenges woke ideology with precision and conviction. His critiques expose what he sees as the contradictions, flaws, and risks within this cultural movement, sparking critical debates on gender, free speech, and personal responsibility. These discussions encourage reflection on modern societal trends and the future we're shaping.
And I also just won the most prestigious award in the country to pursue research at any institution I want, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. So I think I'm pretty, qualified to say that most of what you're saying is based on, old data.
Before we move on, I have a quick favor to ask. If you're enjoying this content, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Over 99% of our viewers watch without subscribing. It only takes a couple of seconds, and your support will help us share these topics with a wider audience. Have you hit that subscribe button? Awesome. Thank you so much for your support. From the start, the atmosphere was already heated up as the student began to list out his academic qualifications in order to form a base to support his claims on gender identity, which he explained that Shapiro had no right to disagree with due to his educational background.
For example, gender identity disorder, that's the DSM-4, bro. We use the DSM-5 now for psychologists to be able to talk about...
I literally cited the DSM-5 in the speech, and it's called gender dysphoria.
Ben Shapiro immediately disagreed with the student's take on gender dysphoria, and already tense moments soon went haywire when the college student sent a torrent of insults to Shapiro while trying to defend the idea that 2 gender identities are a Western culture imposed on the rest of the world.
And you get no pussy, and you can't even make your wife wet, bro, so what's good?
So, let me just say, the nice thing about having several small children is I don't feel the need...
Shapiro, as always, took control of the situation by maintaining his cool and dishing out his remarks on the issue, clearly in disagreement with what the college student had to say, and this seemed to piss him off, and he went all out again for the second time.
I'm a mathematician and a physicist. You cannot tell me...
So I have a question.
And also, you're not a biologist.
So I have a question.
I'm 20...
As a mathematician and a physicist, what in the hell do you know about human biology?
And you got your law degree from Harvard.
The final moments of this interview saw Shapiro leaving aside the issue of trans identity and the influence of Western culture in society. Then, it's all out for the college student, calling for his degree to be revoked.
If your logic is so flawed as a mathematician and a physicist, I would suggest that whichever institution gave you an award, revoke it immediately.
Next, we have another interaction between Ben Shapiro and another college student who seemed to have little patience with the rest of the audience who came to hear Ben speaking.
People's grandparents or their great-grandparents were slaves.
Well, it's okay. No, it's okay. Guys,
Fuck you, I'm talking!
Guys, I actually want to hear. I want to hear. It's okay. It's okay. I want to.
Ben Shapiro was of the opinion that the kid should be given a chance, at least to speak, and he went on to describe the intergenerational trauma of minorities, which he argues exonerates them from some crimes in society.
But that's not what wokeism is. Wokeism is a different thing. Wokeism suggests that all inequalities of today are attributable to not only historic injustices, but also continuing injustices in the now, and that all disparity is attributable to discrimination.
Ben Shapiro believed that this student had it all wrong with the definition of tokenism in this day and age. According to Ben Shapiro, wokeness was a term used to represent the fight against oppression and discrimination. But in the modern era of Western civilization, wokeism now represents a term that has pushed division and race wars.
We're gonna have to stop here because this is going nowhere. But
what's up?
I'm gonna have to stop with this with you because this is going nowhere. All I'm going to say is this. To sum up,
I just am trying to understand your perspective.
Ben had to close the entire argument prematurely because the student was bent on changing the definition and unwilling to relent in his views.
On a fundamental level, you're shifting definitions to avoid the consequences of your own argument. And if the idea is... And final point, if you are going to... Hold on. If you are also...
The next student Ben Shapiro went up against didn't give him as much trouble as the last one, but his questions still baffled Ben Shapiro, who felt he needed to re-educate the college student in basic biology.
Now I have just a question about, in general, we have your preconceptions about gender and all that. So I'm wondering, I find it really unsatisfying when you talk about gender and being like male or female, as just reducing it down to chromosomes.
According to the student, reducing gender to just chromosomes is a false way to represent male and female characteristics.
Don't necessarily fit those categories. If you were to ask me what makes a good man or a useful man, I would give you a description that would include social categories like protecting your family, going out and earning, making sure that you build institutions in your society, right?
Ben was of the opinion that although social factors could create good men, it doesn't change the fact that the principles of middle school biology account for the reason why there are only two genders.
Of male or female, what you're talking about is the most irreducible form of this is the biology, which is why you can uncover a body from 30,000 years ago and a scientist can tell you whether it is a male or a female.
Ben Shapiro has been very clear on his stand that only two genders exist. He has made a career out of going around schools and colleges to debate this very controversial issue. In Ben's opinion, no amount of science can change the fact that only two genders exist. And for a long time, Shapiro has come under a lot of fire for his views.
Everyone you can find and trying to kill a terrorist who is deliberately hiding beneath the civilian area, hiding their rockets in civilian areas, starving their own people. And there is a best. Okay, so let me now address my question.
Another intense moment is when Ben Shapiro, who is also Jewish, debates the Israel and Gaza conflict. According to Shapiro, those who are protesting for Hamas are actually protesting for a notorious terrorist group that has been known to oppress people and suppress the freedom of human rights in their territories.
Israel is effectively doing the same because Gaza is the most densely populated region in the world. There are 15,000 people per square mile.
So does Hamas get immunity because they're there? So Hamas gets immunity.
Israel has killed 3,500 children in the past.
According to the anti-Israel student, Israel is also guilty of using force in its attempt at fighting back against Hamas. But Ben Shapiro points out that the fact Israel uses brute force to fight against Hamas shouldn't exonerate Hamas from the crimes they committed against Israeli civilians.
Clear, your logic is that if you're a terrorist group located in a densely populated community, you hide behind civilians, you're now immune.
Where are the children meant to go?
So you're immune. Okay. That's why I mentioned the dimensions, but okay. Your logic is that
the argument continued to go back and forth as the atmosphere in the room continued to tense up. But soon, Shapiro decided to make a connection between Israel's position in the Hamas conflict and Britain during the World War. And this got the entire room quiet.
The British were wrong in World War II because they did. Many more Germans died than Brits. Based on the numbers, that means that Britain was wrong in World War II.
Britain wasn't bombing.
Ben Shapiro has never shied away from defending Israel, especially when it comes to debates concerning the war. And despite the fact that his stand has brought a lot of backlash, Shapiro has remained adamant in his defense of Israel.
Is up 1,350% in London over the past few weeks. That is why imams shout in Nottingham, "O Muslim, here is a Jew behind me, kill him." And that is why 100,000 people march in London in support of Hamas.
In this heated debate between Shapiro, a University of Cambridge student, Ben Shapiro called out the anti-Israel groups in support of Israel and left no stone unturned as he attacked the idea behind their movement.
What would be like sort of your solution to that? What would you propose if you're the one that's mitigating the deal between Israel and Palestine?
According to Shapiro, no form of mediation will bring the war in Gaza to a halt unless there are land swaps between Israeli people and Palestinian people. According to Shapiro, the call for the total eradication of Israeli citizens from Israeli territory is just not possible.
Everyone in the West is trying to jump to the solution without recognizing the failure of the premise. If you have two parties who are willing to make a deal is available. And if you only have one party who's willing to make a deal is not available.
Right. Ben Shapiro is of the opinion that only Israel is willing to come to a compromise, And since Hamas has repeatedly shown its disinterest in a two-state solution, there will continue to be conflict, and Israel has the right to exist.
Accepted by the Palestinian Arabs or by their predecessors. When I say their predecessors, I mean the Arabs who were in Palestine but didn't consider themselves nationally Palestinian at the time, people who were Syrian, people who were Turkish. The Peel Commission in 1937 recommended a significantly smaller state of Israel.
Ben Shapiro has continued to remain standing on his views, and it's obvious that no backlash or disagreement is going to be good enough to get him to recheck his claims.
Again, it all comes back to the same point. Once there's a peace partner, you can talk. Until there's a peace partner, there's no talks.
Thank you so much. I feel being destroyed, but thank you.
That's all for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around until the end of this video. What moment was the most insane for you? Drop your takes in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heated content. I'll see you all in the next video.